Well, good morning, everybody. I know some of you have had the privilege of hearing Pastor Phil Hirsch this morning at the 8:30 service. I've already received feedback about how wonderful he was, and the message was great. And I won't spend a long time talking about Phil Hirsch, but over the past, I would say 10 years, actually, time flies when you're having fun. Phil has been a mentor to me in many respects. When I was chairing evangelism committee, he was the person I always turned to for help in understanding of what I should be doing and how I should do it and things of this sort. And now we're very privileged that that talent has been recognized, and he will be going to the ELCA headquarters in Chicago, and he's going to talk a little bit about that position, a little bit about leadership and evangelism, and the issues we face as ECLA and growing churches in general. So, Phil?
Maybe, well, should I just stand here? Yeah. Is that all right? Okay, good. Good morning. How many of you were at the first service? About half, okay. My name is Phil Hirsch, and I've been a pastor here in this synod for 19 years. I live near George Mason University, and I served for the first 10 years Bethlehem Lutheran, which is on Little River Turnpike. And so I've been here many times. I've mostly met with the leadership. This is the first time I've been here for a Sunday morning. And I've been working in the area in the synod. We have 75 churches, and I've been working in the areas of stewardship and evangelism, which are two of the scariest words for Lutherans ever. And now I've been given responsibilities for those and more nationally. In the national church, we have 9,300 congregations, about 4 million members. And they divide the national office into, there are 65 synods like ours. Each one, they're divided different geographically. Some are very small, some are large. But I will be given the responsibility, the way that they divide up the work is that they do global mission and then mission in the United States. And I've been asked to be the executive director of mission in the United States. And so that involves new church starts and church revitalization efforts across the country. The leadership to support that, which means seminaries, the training of pastors. And right now there's a huge shortage of pastors all across the country. You didn't really experience it much here, but many of our congregations wait a long period of time before they get to interview pastors. And the pastors we have are not always trained in the ways that the new reality calls for in our church. We'll talk about that in a moment. We also have a division for multicultural ministries and youth and all of the youth gatherings. We do disaster response, and the hunger grants all come under that unit of domestic mission. So it's like the bishop calls it the division for everything else. It's like everything that's not global mission is under this unit, and it's a huge honor to be given this chance to serve in this way. They asked me to focus on two things. One, the revitalization of our congregations, and two, the leadership to support that. And the reason is that our congregations are in trouble. Across the country, 60% of our congregations are either very small or declining and at risk of closure. 60%. 20% are stable, and 20% are growing or doing very well. So that's the landscape across the country. Now, some will blame the culture, and they will say that the reason for this is that the culture has shifted, and it's no longer favorable for people to come to church like on a Sunday morning. There are soccer games on Sundays, you name it, or activities that are going on Sunday mornings. And so church activities compete with people's leisure time choices, right? And there's truth in that is the culture has shifted. We're no longer the Christian society that we perhaps once were. Others would blame the church and say the church has not been adaptable. The old message of Christ always needs to be reinterpreted for a new generation, and we need new technologies. It's very rare, even in our synod, to have screens in use on a Sunday morning. There are a handful. We have 75 churches. I bet there are 7 that use technology like this on Sunday. And how do people connect today with each other, with something that's going on? Social media, right? Church is very slow. So there's truth in that too. Maybe we haven't been as adaptable. One of the reasons I'm convinced that Luther's Reformation took hold was because of Gutenberg. If it wasn't because of the technology that came at the same time, I don't think his message would have been as widely known. So, what do we do about that? Let me pause there and ask questions. I don't want this just to be a monologue. Let's talk. What do you think about that so far? Does that seem about right to you? Or do you share that concern? I mean, the reason why I'm doing this, uprooting myself, is because I'm concerned about the churches in the United States. Yeah.
I've been on the council.
We're recording, so I have to.
Sure. Yeah, I've been president for the last 2 years, and we have been revamping our ideas about evangelism, things. I'd gone to one of the sessions that you had done for the local things, which was excellent. And I think you're right. We're just at a loss to know what to do. We're in that category of stable, declining, kind of right on that borderline, and that we need help with knowing, just like you said this morning, well, our thinking got us this far, but it's not going to get us to the next step. So there really needs to be some mental change as to how we're going about everything.
I think it's also a spiritual one, too. That, of course, is our underpinning for everything, right? It's Scripture, it's Spirit, it's our way of thinking. A few weeks ago, right the day I found out, or there was announced that I got this position, I was in North Carolina. I had never been to Charlotte before. I was at a conference about churches that are anchoring other churches, so larger churches that are partnering with smaller, struggling churches to see if that can be effective, an effective way of helping some of the smaller churches out. Usually we tie smaller churches together and hope for the best, and it's like tying rocks together and throwing them in the water and expecting they're going to float. That just doesn't work. While I was there, on the way from the airport to the church was the Billy Graham Library. And I had never, I'd grow up listening to the Crusades and hearing him preach, and was often moved by his message. And so I decided to go, and he died last year, right? And Ruth died before him, and they're buried there. And so I went through, they had this, it's like Six Flags for Jesus. I mean, it's a very, like they have music piped in, and it's beautiful, and there's a chaplain standing by the graveside who will pray with you. It's very well done. But at the end of it, behind the library, is the big Billy Graham Evangelical Association, which was the driving force for all that they did. And I thought, well, I could, especially now, given this position, go right back there and begin relationships and talking to them about this, about what to do, what do we need to do. But the truth is, 2 things. One, they're in as much trouble as we are. Evangelicals, Roman Catholics are declining. The great McLean Bible Church, that main campus, has been in decline for years. So it's not just us. This is a cultural shift and a church shift that is all across the United States. And these big attractional churches are waning as well. And what you have sometimes, the way people who don't go to church, who are not Christian, actively understand Christianity, I fear, is this. On the one hand, you have a certain version of conservative evangelical Christianity, which can be kind of caustic. You see this on TV. And mean-spirited at times. Not all of it, not by any means, but some of it. And the stuff that gets out there, right, that people pay attention to is that way. And then on the other hand, you have the debacle of the Roman Catholic Church and their inability to address the scandals of, and this is how people are hearing about Christianity, is either this caustic view or one that is that disqualifies itself. And so I thought, what came to me at that moment is, I think we need something new. We need an evangelical association for mainline churches, for churches that have a different way of talking about Jesus as the way of living, a way of life and compassion and love and mercy and justice and goodness and understanding. Those things, that's what we need to strive for. So that was, I think, nationally, one of my ideas is to, because nobody has this figured out. If there was one way to do this, we would have done it a long time ago, all of us. If I would have just emailed it to everybody. All the churches would have gotten it. They would have put in place a program, a plan, a sermon series. None of that is, it's a sea change. We need to be adaptable. So what happens when you're sailing along and the wind's behind you? Any of you sail? And so the wind's behind you, things are going great. What happens when it shifts? And all of a sudden, this is what's happened in our culture. The wind was behind the church, and it kind of filled the church's sails, and its pews. And then it shifted, and now it's blowing against us. But the good news is that, you can sail into the wind. You tack, you use it, and you use the wind, and you sail angle to angle, and you pivot, and you pivot, and you pivot, and you can get and the church has historically done better against the wind than it has with. The church has flourished at times when it was oppressed. Remember? It was in the early church, before Constantine, the first 300 years, when the church thrived. That's when it was perhaps at its best. Or in the Middle Ages, or in the days of the Reformation, when the Church of Luther was being oppressed. That's when we're at our best. So I think perhaps our best days are ahead of us.
Other questions? Here's your big chance. Of the churches that are declining, I forgot the percent that you told us.
60%.
Is there any common reaction or success trend that we could look at, that how people have sort of handled their situations, that would be sort of the lessons learned, that how people have been looking at their issues and how they've diagnosed it? And
you mean from failure, from the 60% that are failure?
Yeah.
There are a few things that they have in common. One is that they are on autopilot. So churches that just continue to do the same things like they've always done year after year without change, it's not just change, it's without thought as to why we do this. That's the number one reason why I think churches flounder when they might not otherwise. We can no longer assume that people will understand why we wear an alb on a Sunday morning. What is that about? You have to explain that. It's not, what is this? This is representative of the grace that covers us all equally, no matter what I look like under it. Okay, just a sentence. Yep.
Have we identified the factors that are present in the 20%? I mean, you started, I guess, in terms of saying they're thinking about what they do, but what else has helped the 20%?
So no and yes. I don't know of any comprehensive study, and maybe that's something I will get to look at the 20% that are growing and to see what are the common factors. There was a study that was done recently, and I talked about it at the assembly before last, about churches that were growing with young adults. And it was a study done by an evangelical seminary in California, but it was across denominations, including evangelicals, mainlines, and Roman Catholics. And they looked at congregations that were growing and had a higher percentage of young adults in their congregations than normal. And they looked at what were the things that they all had in common. And there's a book called Growing Young, and a website that goes with it, so you can Google that, and it will tell you. And one of the things, one of the chapters is it's called the keychain. It's called the keychain, and bless you. The idea is that for young adults, the churches that are good at this, they are quicker to give the keys of the building to the young adults who come. In other words, there are some churches where you have to be there for 20 or 30 years before they let you into leadership, before they give you a key to the room. And now there's another fault to that. Some churches go too quickly, and a young adult comes and they say, "Oh, here, teach Sunday school, and here's the keys to everything. I'm done." That's not the way. But that's one of the characteristics that they found for churches that were growing among young adults.
I agree with you, and there, I've read that most young people, I guess the most growing religion is nuns.
Yes.
Nuns, N-O-N-E, and that's the young people who don't go to church or don't
Correct.
feel identified. Christianity has lost its relevance. The other thing that is of interest to me is the fact that, we are growingly more diverse in our societies. And if you look around here, we all look the same. And how do we reach out and invite these other people to come and participate and be welcoming to them so that we can grow? Because there is a tremendous population out there, and it's obvious that they have needs, and I'm sure spiritual needs. I have talked to a number of people about a book that has spoken to me, and it's called Canoeing the Mountains. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I know it well.
Bolsinger's book. But that, really was an eye-opener to me, where, these guys, Lewis and Clark, were going out looking to find a water route, and all they could find was, once they got past the Lemhi Pass, was mountains. And canoes are not very good in that, but they turned to Sacagawea, an Indian who was a young girl, and she led them through this. And we need to be welcoming and opening to do this. And we may not know how to do this, but we'll have to figure it out together. I mean, there's no roadmap for that. It's just going out and trying to do it. And do you have some advice for churches that are people that are thinking along these lines?
Yes. I think you need that spirit of an adventurer. And that means, it's going to sound trite, and I don't mean it that way. We have to be willing to try new things. And it's going to feel uncomfortable. And it's going to feel it's going to be out of your comfort zone. And we're going to make mistakes, and you're going to say, "Gee, we should never do it that way again." That's the only way we're going to figure this out. And if I read those journals of Lewis and Clark, they kept meticulous journals. Often it would just say, the entry for that day was mosquitoes very troublesome, and that's all that they would say. But they had days of going up the wrong branch of the river, and then they had to come back down, and they had to go back up again, and their whole journey in that way was upriver, and they would put tremendous effort and then have to turn around. That's going to have to be the way of the church for a while, and we're going to have to be willing to let go of some of the things that you treasure about church? A little bit. Not completely, not forever, but we're going to have to let go of them a bit. And I'll give you an example. And this is a very small example. But when it comes to multi-ethnic ministries, which you're right, the future of the church, if we're going to grow, we're going to become younger and we're going to be more diverse than we have been. That's just a truism. It's got to be that way. And to become more diverse means that we're going to be singing some music that is unfamiliar. And I was at our church in Bermuda. We have, our synod includes the island of Bermuda, and we have a church there, and I was meeting with their leadership in the fall, and somebody had to go, and I picked the straw. But they're struggling to grow like everybody. And we were talking about this, and they're trying to become more multi-ethnic. That island is there are a lot of sharp contrasts between race and class there. And their pastor is African Bermudan. He's black, Bermudan citizen. And most of the congregation's white. And the president of the congregation, who is white, I said to them, I heard this rule that when new members join, you should tell them that they're going to like 70% of what you do. I just love that idea. So this is true for all of you. Think of this for the future. From now on, you're going to like 70% of what happens in church. So 30%, when it's happening and it's not like your thing, think that it's for somebody else. That which is happening on particularly worship, that's what gets us most. But think when that's happening, that is going to meet somebody else's spiritual need. It may be a form of music. It may be a way of praying, which is more spontaneous. It might be a prayers for healing. It may make you kind of wince and feel a little uncomfortable. And this president of this congregation in Bermuda said to me, he said, that's so helpful to me. He said, then I can just close my eyes when this happens and pray and let that time in the worship be my offering for other people who are come. That maybe God will be reaching them in those moments. That's the spirit that we need. And beyond that, I don't know what this is going to mean in terms of our organization as congregations. I suspect there will always be some legacy congregations that are just like this now. But I also think that there's going to be some changes that we can't predict, that are going to be different ways that Christians affiliate together, that congregate, that are outside of what we now know of as a congregation in a building with a constitution. That's one way of being church. But we have to be open to what God maybe has in mind. And more people, I think, will keep coming to Christ if we can allow the vessel to be shaped in different ways.
I have a question.
Sorry.
Pastor Hirsch.
Yeah.
One of my concerns is around technology, that many have not really advantaged it as could be. I think we're doing a pretty good job of that. But I have a parallel reverse concern in our society that people are now only communicating in bits. And God calls us to relationship.
Yeah.
Unless we can change the ways and means, and I think that's flexing to the environment and the needs, and we could see Paul even doing that when he talked about the unknown God. It's like perfect opportunity. But everybody has that same need for God. Everybody has the same need for relationship, but it's personal. And so how do we help our congregations not just invite somebody to a worship service, which is totally countercultural now,
right?
But how do they build relationships with people who are not just unchurched, but not familiar with the gospel?
It's so interesting because first of all, I have three young men who are my sons, and they're 18 to 23 years old now, and they were all home for Christmas, and one of them was in the basement with their friends. And they decided to all go to their own homes so they could play the same video game together. So they were all hanging out together in my basement like they always did, and then because of technology, they separated so they could be together in a different way. It just blew my mind, like, what? What are you doing? And an interesting thing has happened with churches. There's been a movement to go online, have everything put online. All of the sermons, all of the teachings, everything you need is online. But what they found is that if you can get everything online, then fewer people come to meet in person. And so there's a caution that's coming out that I hear in your question. And the solution, I think, is that we have to counsel, especially our younger people who've grown up with technology as natural as their hand, right? There's a pastor in Chicago who has had this issue, and what he's done is he meets with young adults when they come to his church and helps them develop their own individual spiritual plan for growth. And it bothered me at first because I thought, well, that's just more individualism. But as a part of this plan, he has them go and meet with other people. It's that simple, right? I mean, the Christian way cannot be lived alone. I don't have the wisdom to do this by myself, or the strength. I need others who are struggling, who give me courage and strength. That's the way of Christ. It always has been. And there's always a time together and a time apart. That's normal. That's what we have to teach. And technology then can assist that, right? That's then the friendships, the relationships you develop in person, you keep going. That's the beauty of it. So when I leave this synod, when I move to Chicago, I'll keep relationships going where 20 years ago they would have fallen aside. But I'll keep these relationships because of Facebook and Twitter. And you can follow me, by the way, on philhirsch.com. I'm going to have a blog. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your insight. You've seen a lot, and it's very helpful, I think. One of the things that we do in this church that I question whether we're doing the right thing is that we've set up 2 services. We used to have 3, but we went to 2 because we wanted the children to always be in one of the services. We didn't want the children just to come to the Sunday school and the adults by themselves. And I thought that was the smartest thing we ever did, frankly, personally, because it brought families and everything together, in my opinion. But now I'm looking in the future. What we're doing now is in the early service, we use the videos, we use the projectors, we get people's heads out of the books, and looking around and singing and everything. And that's part of the rationale, because I was involved when we did that, was to get people's heads up and around and be part of the service. However, in the second service, you notice everything went off after this service. We don't use those projectors at their service unless there's some special need. And I'm wondering, are we basically making a mistake here? Are we basically saying we're going to let the people get in camps, and we're just going to we're going to satisfy the people with their needs because they're more comfortable, when in fact maybe should we be mainly saying, hey people, you're 30% are going to be unhappy with this, but the person sitting next to you might say, oh, this is really good. I don't know, and I just wanted to challenge that question and challenge council and the congregation to think about. We have to do things different in the future. Is a small step to do more of the social media elements, only from the context of people be seeing and getting a visual?
That's a great question. I think that that's exactly what we need to be asking ourselves. Is this right? Is it better? There are some churches, when they bifurcate too widely on their style of worship, that really do develop 2 camps. I can't answer that, whether that's true here or not. You have to ask that of the people who are coming. How do you feel about this? Is it worth experimenting with trying a song on the screen and then explain it? Here's why. We find that our posture is better when we're standing up, whatever it may be. To just give this a try. I find children's messages are best for that. Right, let's just use that time to experiment a little more widely.
One of the other problems we have is that the older, more traditional people are also more the ones that are funding the church. And so if we make them unhappy, then they stop funding or they go somewhere else. And, this is we don't see good funding from young or even, middle families that are struggling with their own finances. So how do we keep the older ones happy while we bring in the younger ones?
Well, I think you have to bring them along. I wouldn't say, don't just throw stuff on the screen, but talk to people. Say, and then if there's one or two people that really just can't come along, then at the end you say, we don't want to lose anybody, but this is what we've chosen. You want to invite people to you want to say to them, just like we've been saying here, look, the future of the church is going to have to be a bit different than the past has been. Will you join us in helping us figure this out? Would you be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable to have something on the screen for a part of the service, to see how that would be? I know it's not your thing, but it's going to reach somebody else. We're going to try this. Would that be all right? You have to kind of lead people in and see if they'd be willing to consider that for the sake of others. We have to go beyond ourselves and say, what do others need? What will help them to connect to Christ in the way that what we want to do is remove any barriers, help people to find the way in. And that's increasingly difficult. Like somebody was saying, worship itself is countercultural now. If you say to somebody at the office, well, I went to church today, it's very different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, where it was just assumed, well, everybody goes to church. Like, it's like I went to the movies yesterday, no big deal. Now if you say, especially if you're a young adult, and you say I went to church, they're going to be like, huh? There's going to be eyebrows raised. It's very different. Now, you can work with that. Like I said, the church has always done better in that environment. We just need to claim it. And this is, I want to lead into leadership, but the leadership needs to change too. The idea of the pastor being the primary person who evangelizes, now I'm not saying that the pastor isn't the one who helps to set the pace and demonstrate what this means, but when Jesus left, he said, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. He wasn't just saying that to pastors. We, as children of the Reformation, ought to know that better than anybody. The priesthood of all believers means that every one of us is one of those people to whom Christ said that message. And that means we all have a role. And the pastor's role I was with a beloved pastor a week ago, and she was wonderful. We were out and we were in a nursing home, and she was there like at the lunch table. She was talking to everybody and kneeling at their feet and talking to them, and that was very, very nice. But there were no members of her church with her. And I thought, this can't be the way of the future. Like when you need a pastor, the pastor should be there. But the pastor can't, if the pastor is the only person ministering to others,